This is the Web Platform Podcast, episode number 77, Project Management and Git Workflows. I am your host this week, Danny Blue, and with me, as always, is Justin Ribeiro. Come on, say hi, Justin.
Oh, he's frozen.
He is frozen. Hangouts hates Justin. You guys know what Justin sounds like. As soon as he gets his computer restarted, we'll get it back on. Well, with us today, we have two very special guests. We have Ralph Whitbeck.
Hello, how nice to meet you guys.
And Tim Peterson.
Hi there.
Awesome. So real quick. So Ralph, starting with you, just give us who you are, what you do, what you like, that kind of deal. Real quick summary.
Sure. So, I'm a developer evangelist for the Atlassian ecosystem. So what that means is I'm trying to work with developers of our products to try to get them to build add-ons for our cloud products like Jira, Confluence, HipChat, and Bitbucket. As well as that, I also sit on the board of directors of the jQuery Foundation, and I've been a part of that project since about 2009. So. And I've been helping with the developer relations for that for quite a bit of time now, and I'm excited to see where the foundation goes now since we've merged with the Dojo Foundation, and it's exciting times there.
Very cool. Tim? Tim also froze.
Can you hear me now, guys?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm on a somewhat crappy Wi-Fi connection.
That's fine.
So I'm a senior developer and Git evangelist at Atlassian. I've been here about 10 years, pretty much my whole professional career. I used to be a Jira developer once upon a time, so I know a little bit about project management. But for the last 8 or so years, I've been working on Atlassian's developer tools, all sorts of things to do with source control and Git tracking and code review.
Very cool. Yeah, so if people haven't noticed, they will forgive us if we have some people dropping every once in a while. We will do our best. It's what happens when you do a live, but it's fine. It's great. It's fantastic. Okay, so what I wanted to start on first is project management. This is not the title that gets the most views, right? Project management and Git workflows. Project management is not the most fun part about software development. But why is it so important? Why is it so important to think about that stuff when you're going into a project? Obviously, it's different if it's just your little side project off on the side. But as soon as you have more than a couple people,
sure.
Why is it important to start thinking about some sort of project management or process workflow?
Yeah. So I'll jump in there. I think the important piece to that is, try to keep down feature creep. Try to make sure that everybody's aligned in what they're working on and what they should be working on, so that you don't come out of the other end with a software release that just doesn't make sense, that just has new features all over the place. It hasn't really fixed all the bugs. So project management really just sort of takes that step back and say, okay, what are the important pieces? What needs to be fixed? What are the bugs that are immediate, that are on fire, that we really need to work on? And what are how can we carve out some time to work on some features and go from there? So yeah, that's why I feel like it's important. It keeps you grounded and it keeps you going in the right direction.
Totally, and I think that forward planning piece is kind of really important for the other teams involved in the software dev process as well. Because I feel like it's one thing to keep all the developers on track, but then you've also got teams like quality assurance potentially who have to test the final artifact before it goes out to be deployed. And then some of the other, I guess, less technical teams as well, like your marketing team, who have to put together a go-to-market strategy around what features are going to be in the release. And if you're just sort of flying by the seat of your pants, then sometimes it can be really hard to tell exactly what's going to go out the door when you hit that big red release button. I think the other thing about project management is, particularly when you look at agile project management, being able to have like a list of stuff sitting in a backlog that's roughly prioritized means that you can kind of tell that you're working on the right stuff at the right time. And it also means that if you need to pivot because there's a fire somewhere or because your customer's needs changed, then it means that once you've gone and addressed that, you can come back and still have a rough set of things that you want to ship in the next release, and just pivot back and keep working on that.
I think those are both good. I think those are both really good answers, because it's also, a lot of people work on small teams. A lot of these things make sense, and people think they only apply to really large teams. But I think what was just explained shows why it's important all around. Because when you do have small teams, a lot of times you have finish by this date, and that's the only real guidance you have, and then you put whatever process you want in place, but you still have to get everything done by this date. And
it's very important for small teams. Before I worked at Atlassian, I worked at a consultancy company where we did JavaScript work for our clients, and typically teams were the team lead and a developer. And the team lead was talking with the clients, and then the developer was doing the work. And so the team lead was responsible for all of the project management, right? So trying to track down the requirements from the customer, determining what the deadlines were, and then sort of instilling some kind of project management with the rest of the team on within the company to say, okay, these are the things that we need to do, and these are this is the time frame. And so you basically have to set up some kind of project management. Usually we use Gantt charts, which I can't believe I just said that on a live podcast, because I hate Gantt charts. We use that to sort of figure out what the timeline of that was going to look like, and sort of go from there. And then we sort of switched that from Gantt charts, which is more a waterfall model, right, into an agile approach where we sort of broke it down into tasks and try to figure out are the tasks small enough or what, and sort of use a Kanban board to try to move that across.
Yeah, totally. And I think using a Kanban board, and I mean, there's definitely some overhead involved in making sure that you track your project using an issue tracker, for example, like Jira. But the upside of that is that once you've got that stuff tracked, you can kind of send a link out to your stakeholders, and they can keep an eye on that rather than continually, pinging you for status updates and things. So I think even if you're literally a one-person shop or a two-person shop with a team lead and a dev, like you were saying, being able to have kind of this set of state sitting in your issue tracker that accurately reflects your project is really valuable as a communication tool as well.
So, what do you think are some of the most reasons that projects break down? Because, like you said, there's a little bit of overhead for some of these things. I think making sure you have tasks broken down into small enough chunks is really important, extraordinarily important, and that can derail a project right there, because especially like you said, if you have a stakeholder or somebody looking at a Jira, whatever, and I mean, we're guys from Atlassian, we're going to mention Jira when we're talking about that stuff. There are a ton of other pieces like that. So, but what we need to do is make sure the pieces are broken up into small enough chunks that that you can show progress. So you can say, all right, I finished this, now it's moved on to QA, they know what the acceptance criteria are, and it moves on. Rather than having just a couple really big tasks, and then it's just a perception thing. It doesn't look like you've gotten anything done. Some people really care the number of tickets that you push through. It's not a good way to track progress, but some stakeholders care about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with the sizing of tasks as being critical to succeeding in a sprint. And I think that's actually one of the places where sprint planning and project planning can come off the rails. Where often you'll see a team failing in Agile because they'll have issues that are sized too big or potentially too many issues sitting in the sprint, and then they get to the end of the sprint and they've maybe got 25% of the tickets through the workflow, and then the rest are still sitting, either untouched or in some sort of state of in progress. And then they just kind of slide all of those in the next, add some more work, and then
completely agree, Tim.
So I think Yeah, so I think trying to size stuff effectively is the way to do it.
And it's tough. It's not an easy thing to do. Which is why also when you have small teams, or if it is just you, it's tough to do that. Learning how to estimate tasks or anything is tough. Saying, like, how long is this going to take you? And like, well, I mean, and this is something every developer has to do at some point. And you're always afraid to overestimate, because then people just think you're BSing them. But at the same time, if you don't give yourself any kind of a cushion, and then you don't deliver, it's bad. It looks bad on you. So
people are horrible at estimating time. It's a bad way to go about things. I mean, LOEs or levels of effort or anything, depending on how you want to do it. I mean, that is a very hard thing to do, even if you've been in the business a long, long time. Time is hard to estimate. People are, really good at underestimating the level of efforts that are required to implement features, which is why project management is important, because good project managers should say, yeah, I think we're gonna ease that one in for things where that estimating levels of effort are hard.
So the best example of estimation that I've ever seen was for a client that had agile practices instilled within their company, and so when we were brought in, we were asked to be a part of that. And so they had two-week sprint cycles, and at the beginning of the sprint, we did I think it's called bingo. It's called estimation bingo. And basically, they break down each of the tasks, and we would sort of play bingo of like, what do we think this task is? Is it a 1 point, a 3 point, 5 point, 8 point, whatever, right? And everybody would go in, and we'd sort of like throw out the low, the low side, the high side, come into where everybody was grouped together. And then, sort of ask, why do you think, ask the outliers, like, why do you think this was a 8 point instead of a 3 point? And then, they would make their case and that kind of thing. And then sort of consensus would be, okay, it would be a 3 point, maybe, maybe you don't see the big picture. And sort of, so through the group consensus, it came down to what the actual estimation was. And I think it sort of was, it still isn't the best way, right? I mean, it's not going to produce accuracy, but at least it was a consensus within the whole team of what the actual estimation should be for that task, and so it didn't put the estimation on any one person. It rather put it on the whole team to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I mean, too often I think a lot of developers feel isolated in their estimates, where it is on you and this Herculean task to deal with, figuring out some massive architecture that you may not understand entirely. I mean, it's, especially as systems grow, it is hard to know exactly the side effect or, what's going to occur when you go down any one of those particular paths. So group consensus, I think, is probably a better way than just saying, you know what, it's your job to estimate everything. Doesn't really work.
So another area where outside of estimation and all that is just sort of having the proper communication channels set up, right? So like I tweeted a couple of months ago this image called Managing Complex Change, and it's basically built up of 5 different things like vision, skills, incentives, resources, and an action plan. And if any of one of those things are missing, you sort of get a side effect out of it. So like if you're missing the vision for a specific change, you get confusion. If you're missing skills, you get anxiety within your team. If you're missing incentives, you get resistance from your team because they're not properly motivated. If you don't have the proper resources, you get frustration in your team because they don't feel like they have enough to do their job. If you don't have a proper action plan, like what we've been sort of talking about here, you sort of get this false start because they start, but then they don't know where to go next, right? And so, that I feel is like the fundamental part of project management is to sort of make sure that as a project manager that you have all these things aligned, that you have the vision, the skills, the incentives, the resources, and the action plan all put together before you start a project, so that your team is, can fully understand why this change is needed, what the vision is for it, make sure that everybody's got the proper skills, what the incentive is for getting it done, why are we actually doing this, what's the light at the end of the tunnel, make sure the resources are fully there, and then having that action plan. So starting out with maybe doing that estimation bingo at the beginning of sprints, and doing the sprints and doing the retrospectives to make sure that you have a proper cadence going forward.
Velocity is tough to judge,
Right.
which is what a lot of people, which is if your velocity is like how much are you getting done, how quickly, and it is really it's really tough to figure some of that stuff out. But hey, Justin, you wanna kick us off with moving into a little bit about Git?
Sure. So, Git. Source control, all the fun things and wonderfulness of managing code and other things in a hopefully sort of sane manner. Can you guys talk about a little bit about Git? Why Git? Why has Git become sort of this pervasive thing in our development workflows and in our project management?
Well, it's the version control system that Linus Torvalds built, so we have to use it. It's
as good a reason as I think anything else can give.
I thought it was so that we could work on a plane. Wasn't that like the driving force, so that we could check in code on a plane?
Well, exactly. Yeah, it's actually it's not even maintained by Linus anymore. It's actually maintained by a Google developer named, I think, Junio Hamano is the current maintainer. Yeah, look, I think that the on a plane thing is actually probably the most important thing about Git, in that it is fundamentally different to older sort of centralized version control systems like CVS or Subversion or even Perforce, where you have kind of a central repository and developers are working directly against that from a local working copy. Whereas with Git and other distributed version control systems, you end up with a complete copy of your repository locally that you manipulate and commit. And that has a few different flow-on effects. The first being that, yeah, you absolutely can develop without a connection to a central server, so on a plane or a train or under the sea, if you like. Any commit, for example, is extremely quick compared to the older ones that have to call out over the network. And things like history traversal and history rewriting, which Git is fairly famous for, are really not just trivial to do, but also, again, extremely quick to pull off. You only really have the latency of a network call when you actually have to share that code with the rest of the team by pushing it back to a central server, or off to your little private fork sitting on a server somewhere. So yeah, in summary.
Yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, yeah, I was going to say, in summary, yeah, look, I think that the D in DVCS, the distributed part of Git, is definitely its defining feature.
And I think with any sort of version control, the kicker is that Git sort of got adopted by folks, right? The adoption of Git across a wide range of both private and open source projects sort of has solidified its sort of position as sort of thing to use. Is that good for developers? Should developers look at other sort of source control management tooling?
It's interesting, right? I think generally, yes, I think having choice is a good thing. However, with something like version control, I think that the tooling that's built around it, particularly since Git in its raw form can be fairly arcane. It's not the most approachable of tools. So kind of the tooling that's been built up around it in terms of IDEs and continuous integration systems and actual Git hosting services as well. I think it's kind of nice that everyone's sort of standardized on a single one, a single version control system. Not that absolutely everyone in the world is using Git. There still are a fair number of people using alternatives like Mercurial or still stuck on centralized version control systems like Subversion. But I think the fact that the majority of the world has standardized on one means that it first of all, gets much easier to use because there's a lot of development effort put into making the tool itself easier, but then also the tooling and ecosystem that grows up around it improves much more quickly as well.
And the kicker with tooling and things of that nature is that workflows naturally sort of come out of the tools that we have, the way people work. I mean, but the kicker with workflows is that there's a lot of different approaches, right? Git was probably not for a lot of folks, it's the first sort of version control they've learned, but for some of us who came from other version control systems who are older or are stuck on other sorts of older things, what kind of Git workflows are out there in practice today? Like, what are people doing or should be doing?
So I'll jump in here, Tim, if you don't mind. So the first time I ever learned about like a Git workflow was actually when I joined the jQuery project, right? That was like the first time I actually saw a workflow in practice, right? So the workflow being, if you want to contribute to an open source project, you start by forking the code, pulling it down, doing the fix, pushing it back up into your repo, and then requesting a pull request to the main source code. That way, you can still work on the code, you still have full access to the code, but yet you're not, you don't have that full trust yet of the project maintainer, but yet you can still submit code for review into the project. And I thought that was really, really cool. And I did some training with Git later on and learned about all sorts of different workflows that there are. And I'm sure Tim can talk a lot about the different workflows because that falls right in his wheelhouse. But I just wanted to mention workflows for me started at open source, and it now is gone into what we do with our blog and in our for developer.atlassian.com. We use a workflow there as well. So Tim, why don't you talk more about that?
Yeah, for sure. And look, I think that's a really important point to make. That kind of Git's workflows originated in the open source arena because it was originally developed by Linus to track.
And
it's really where you as a contributor don't have access to create your own fork and then contribute to that and then create a pull request back into that central repo. Git also has really, while we're talking about open source, it also has really good support for managing contributions over a mailing list. There's a whole bunch of commands, which I think is how Git itself is still contributed to. There's literally sending patch sets around by email. And that again works really well because it's got nice little commands for formatting patches and integrating them back into your repo. But I think what's really happened, what's really exciting for us, certainly at Atlassian in terms of supporting professional teams, is that the branching workflows used by commercial software developers have gotten a lot more sophisticated in the last few years. And potentially, I say more sophisticated, but probably simpler as well. I think there's been a couple of fairly famous branching models. One called Git Flow that was quite popular. That involves creating branches for basically everything. So you create feature branches for developing a new feature, and then you create a new branch to finalize a release, and then you create branches for support fixes and hot fixes and things like that as well. But there's kind of a simpler workflow that's known as that every logical feature that your team works on is on a separate.
Hey Tim, you broke up there. You broke up there just a little bit. Can you back up just like a minute and a half or so?
Oh, yeah, no problems. So I guess I was starting to talk about
other than
workflows for
yeah.
Other than Git Flow, yeah, that's right. So I think professional teams these days, because there's a certain level of trust within the development team, they don't have to go the sort of full-blown open source forking workflow. Instead, they typically adopt branching workflows. And Git Flow is one model that's relatively popular, but there's also a simpler feature branching workflow, which basically just involves, depending on whether you're a running a SaaS product or a versioned product. So depending on how many supported versions you have to maintain, typically it just involves creating new branches for the features that you're working on and then merging them back in. So it's kind of simpler to work with, and there's a little bit less cognitive overhead than there is with something like Git Flow.
Cool. No, yeah, so I'm a fan of Git. I'm a fan of Git Flow. Partially because, at least for me, it's easier to. And maybe it's just because I've been working with it in a while. I have the opposite thing where it makes it easier for me to, like, I guess, mentally model what's going on if everything's off on its own. I also think that sometimes it's easier for, especially if you're onboarding new developers or especially new junior developers, if you just tell them create a separate branch for absolutely everything, and then there's also less stress on them when they're dealing with a lot of the Git stuff, because especially if they're not used to using something like Git, it's like, I really, really just don't want to mess this up, right? Like, I don't want to somehow just completely somehow I've just rebased the entire repo into a single commit, and oh god, what happened? So
absolutely, yeah. I think it's a really strong point. Like,
yeah. It can be
having
scary.
Like a first graph. Oh, you go. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Yeah, but it's that idea. So they can have their own little sandbox, kind of, which should be, based off of your latest develop branch, and then they can do whatever they want to it. And then in order for them to get any changes back in, like, there can't be any merge conflicts and things like that. And that's also where using, like, pull requests and things like that become really powerful. For one, as a learning and collaboration tool, and one, just to make sure that hopefully your code doesn't get messed up. And that's something else that anybody that contributes to open source or maintains an open source project will be very used to. And that's kind of where I want to go into. So we're talking about Git, and so we have these different processes. Then there's the one tricky. So whatever process you go with, you have a branch where you're working on a feature, using full Git flow for one specific bug fix or whatever it is. Now you need to get it back into the main develop branch, and a lot of teams will do that with pull requests. So does one of you guys want to explain exactly what a pull request is? Because there might be a bunch of people out there that have heard people say it but don't know exactly what it is or what it means.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, for sure. Don't mind if I do. Sorry, so the name pull request comes from literally this idea of you're requesting another developer to pull your changes into their master branch. So like a long time ago, I guess before Bitbucket and GitHub and other systems implemented pull requests, the concept was still there, where you were maybe pinging them via IM or via IRC, or like literally just sending them an email to say, hey, look, I've got this set of changes that on my Git master branch that I'd like you to pull into your client. So the way that that's manifested in tools like Bitbucket is that request, which is you'll have like an inbox with a set of these changes that are developed. There'll be a set of reviewers that have been assigned to it, and really what you're looking at is a diff.
I like the intermittent just freezes of his face.
I was laughing at that as well.
My Wi-Fi connection is still playing up.
Yeah, a little bit. Yes.
Every once in a while, just mid-sentence, and we just get this beautiful right in frame of just your frozen face. Right there.
No.
It
now I'm a little self-conscious. But yeah, I mean, essentially, a pull request is really just a diff that the other developers in your team can review to sort of see the changes that you've made, and then provide feedback on them if they have issues or changes that they want made. And then it provides a nice, big merge button that you can press to get those changes into the target branch. And typically that involves on the Git level creating a merge commit that binds those two branches together, which is.
Yeah. So before we start moving away from it, I have one quick question about you talking about just that pressing that merge button and merging the old the feature branch into the develop branch. Are you guys a fan of as soon as a pull request has been accepted, deleting that branch and keeping as few branches as possible, or are you guys more a fan of keeping a hold of a bunch of the old branches for potentially going back through and finding stuff?
Well, it's funny. It's funny you say that because in Bitbucket, when you submit a pull request, there is actually a checkbox that says delete this branch upon merge, which I think all of our developers are utilizing. So I think we fall into the realm of being fans of deleting the branch as soon as it's merged back in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think with something like Subversion, where it didn't really well, branches are very, very, very different based in Subversion, but it doesn't really track. Well, all the older versions of Subversion didn't really track the branch that was being merged in, and really just looked like a big patch that was being applied to your trunk. In Git, although the branch is kind of gone once you delete it, once you've merged that in, you have the merge commit that sort of shows the structure of the branch, as if you hadn't deleted it, and the
Froze on a black screen this time.
To generate branch name in it. This is terrible. No.
Oh no, this is one of the most entertaining things I've ever seen. This is fantastic. Please continue.
But well, yeah. So I guess I'm a big fan of deleting, just because it sort of cleans up your repository a little bit. And so if you're using Git at the command line and you type Git branch, you don't have thousands of branches left there. And realistically, Git is going to be tracking all of that data for you anyway. So the actual branch ref will be gone, but it's still there in the commit message, and it's still there in the structure of your repo. So I don't think you'll lose anything valuable by deleting it.
You can still cherry pick commits, and you can still reverse commits, and all that kind of stuff. Didn't mean to derail. I was just kind of curious because I think Justin had a. So we mentioned something earlier. So Justin, go ahead.
Well, yeah, it's funny with Git. There's a lot of different ways to do things in Git.
I like that you can just kind of stop right there. It's funny with Git, and then just move on.
Oh, so you've been watching me work this morning, I see. Yeah, I mean, Git can be a little bit. Of course, there's going to be a siren right next to the building at this point. With team workflows, there is a little bit of a debate on what to do with the idea of rebasing. People don't quite, or at least some of the juniors that we have, they don't quite understand rebasing. Should you be reusing? Should you be using the rebase, or when should you do it? What is a rebase? It is a different sort of thing. Where do you guys stand on the topic of the old mystical rebase of Git?
It's funny because in open source, in the open source world, they don't click the merge button right on the bottom of a pull request. They want to pull down that branch and do a rebase with the master branch, so that there is no merge commit. So it sort of looks seamless to it. It's funny. Like a year ago, Tim was saving me because I tried to do a rebase into our master without doing a pull first, and sort of deleted a bunch of commits. So a rebase to me feels a little more dangerous than just doing a merge that has fast forward only type of merge going on, if you can do that. So it's a little more risky. But Tim, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I agree. I remember that particular incident. It's really, really easy for things to go pear-shaped if you rebase, particularly if you rebase in the wrong direction. And I'm kind of in the same camp as Danny here, when he mentioned kind of how Git flow is nice because it's prescriptive, and certainly for onboarding junior devs onto your team, or any developers really who are still kind of coming to get grips with Git. I think having the simplest workflow possible means that there's just sort of less scope to shoot yourself in the foot. That said, I can understand why open source teams like rebasing, particularly if you have a central maintainer and they're the only person who updates their repository. Then rebase is really nice because it means you have this one long linear set of commits in the repo. which means that traversing your history or reading your Git log is kind of a more pleasant experience because you don't have merge commits littering it everywhere. That said, it doesn't really work in a team context. Maybe I'll just backpedal and explain quickly for listeners exactly what a rebase is, just in case anyone's not kind of across it. So basically, the way that Git works is that you continually create you continually create commits on top of old commits, and each commit has a reference to its parent. So even though you have like it's a distributed version control system and everyone has their own copies of repositories, at the end of the day, all of these commits get unified into a thing called a directed acyclic graph, which is basically all of the commits have to refer to their parents. So what a rebase is where you take a section of that graph and then replay it on top of another section. So an example of this might be if you have a feature branch that's diverged from the work that's sitting on master. It's basically you taking that entire branch and then kind of unwinding it, so removing all of the commits back to the branch point, and then replaying them on top of the tip of your master branch. This does a couple of things. Actual diffs may change a little bit based on what's been going on in that master branch since the branch was originally created. But it also changes all of the shars or the commit hashes that are associated with those. So Git actually views them as different commits, which is quite dangerous if other members of your team aren't aware that a rebase has occurred, because Git will actually treat those as different commits. So if they go on and perform their own merges or do more work on top of the old branch that has since been rebased, then you're going to end up with evil things like duplicate commits sitting in your repository, or bits of work that you thought you'd deleted that might start popping up again. So there's certainly a lot of scope to hang yourself with a rebase if you mess it up well.
I think in the office now, the I guess subscribed way of doing it is pretend rebase doesn't exist.
Nice. And I think that's a really sensible option. At Atlassian, many of the teams do that as well. There are a few exceptions though. Basically, I'll kind of not prescribed methodology, but a recommended one, although the one that I have. Rebasing is okay as long as it's only on a private branch that only you are contributing to. It's totally fine in Git to rewrite your own history, provided you haven't published that, or provided that no one else has pulled it. But if you should never ever rewrite history that's been published or that someone else might have mutated, because that's where you start falling apart. So I guess that our rule of thumb is like you can rebase if you know what you're doing and it doesn't affect anybody else. But yeah, I still think the majority of developers at Atlassian are probably still just doing the traditional branch and merge without doing any sort of fancy history rewriting or rebasing.
Bitbucket adds this really convenient merge button right at the top of the page. So I mean, like, why do a lot more commands that you don't really need to do, right? If you guys don't mind, I want to roll back to the pull request issue real quick. And I want to ask you guys, because I've been having this discussion with my team regarding pull requests and how they get used, and I want to sort of get like your guys' consensus on this. So, Tim eloquently told us what pull requests are. Like you've got a bit of code or a blog post that's ready to be merged into master, so you do a pull request. We've got this blog, and we get a few people that use pull requests as a way to sort of just start a conversation. And pull request isn't sort of ready to be merged, but just sort of like, here's what I'm thinking about. Let's collaborate on that. What do you guys think of that use of a pull request?
I think I disagree with it. I'm trying to really say, because they are great tools for collaboration. So maybe something doesn't have to be done in an aspect. So I don't think that. So for example, if you had a blog post or something, so say it was like, so you submit a blog post or something like that, but like you hadn't linked to it from anywhere, or something like that. Maybe something like that would be fine to start doing stuff. But the only problem I see with that is that then you start getting purposely incomplete things in your master or develop branch or or whatever it is. So I'm of the opinion that anytime you submit a pull request, you should be prepared for somebody to click that merge button up at the top.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too, because sometimes pull request comes in and they're like not ready to be reviewed, and I'll forget to come back to it. And like when do you know when that pull request is ready for review is sort of where I'm going with that. So yeah, I'm with you guys, and I'd love to hear Tim and Justin's opinion on that as well.
I've seen a lot more lately where that seems to be occurring, at least in some open source projects, where pull requests are being like, this is what I'm thinking about, and then there's a conversation that sort of happens around it. I think it comes back to workflow, honestly. I think it depends if that's the sort of workflow that you want to operate within. But I know from my personal experience just working with other projects, like that's just not the way it's done. Like that's not where conversations occur.
Sure.
Like if you've got a branch you want someone to look at, you say, hey, let's talk about this branch.
But that requires the person to either pull it down and work on it, and then provide some kind of feedback somewhere else.
Yeah, and again, but see that was our work. That's always been some of the workflows that we've used, though. Like, oh, look, because that conversation's occurring, it's just not happening on a pull request. And then I saw one of these the other day for, I think it was on Node or something, where someone had pulled something in, and there was a huge conversation around, like, as this sort of feature was being built out or fixed, and honestly, it was a little hard to follow for me. Like I was like, "Is this mergeable? Can I pull this and test this?" Like I didn't understand.
Right.
So for me, it comes down to workflow.
It almost feels like there needs to be another feature within the centralized, like Bitbucket in GitHub, where there needs to be something that says be able to comment more fluently within a branch, right? To be able to do a little bit more collaboration on a branch, I guess.
Yeah. I think that would be helpful. Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely so.
I do think that pull requests can be a place for conversation for really good conversation, but again, back to my point originally is that you have to be prepared. You never want to put something in there. So you could submit something it could be for a bug fix, it could be for a feature, it could be for whatever, and you're like, this is what I did. This is what I did. At least to my understanding, it works, and this is how I've laid things out. And then if a discussion comes up about, like this way might potentially interfere with something else, this actually isn't a good way, something like that. At the end of when you submit a pull request, you should be ready for somebody to decline it or for somebody to press merge.
Sure.
Yeah. At least all the conversation is fine as long as at the end of the conversation somebody clicks decline or somebody clicks merge.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, I like that idea of the pull request being the start of the conversation like that. Like I mean, as a developer, you're always saying like code speaks, out of the words, right? Like if someone can do a quick prototype or something to prove a concept, I quite like that idea. And certainly the pull request provides a nice place to actually have that conversation, because you can comment on the actual diff and say, well, maybe I wouldn't do this in this class. But I do agree that there does need to be some sort of minimum level of quality that makes it mergeable. Mm-hmm. It's almost like I wonder if we can improve the tools to have like an additional state associated with the pull request, maybe. So you can say like this is firmly in draft, or ready to be merged.
So something's needed, because sometimes we get so many pull requests that like you lose track of where something is, because it's still either being drafted, or it's like a conversation was had and there needs to be some improvements being made before it gets reviewed again. So yeah, maybe like a labeling system or something. I don't know. Let's make that happen. All you get people who are watching today, make this happen.
When Bitbucket does have a feature where you can comment on individual commits even if they aren't part of a pull request. So theoretically, you could kind of share a branch with someone. They could go through and comment on individual commits, but it doesn't have that nice sort of aggregation that a pull request has. Like, these are all of the changes that are going to be merged to master and shipped to your customers.
Exactly.
Is this a good idea? So
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So around these sorts of topics, rebasing and pull requests and branches and all sorts of things, I think one of the things we've all touched on is that Git has some rough edges at times. The command line syntax kind of sometimes requires serious CLI study when you're in that state of, I don't know what you're doing, Git. Should Git be easier? I mean, do workflows resolve some of the learning curve when you really get down into sort of like the really hardcore nature of Git, or should Git be simply easier to use? Or are there tools around that where you have that make it easier to use?
I think it's like, like for 75% of the users out there, like git add, git commit, git push, and git pull are like the only commands that they're going to use. And IDEs like Visual Studio Code, they've integrated them right into the IDE to make that as simple as possible. I've started using Visual Studio Code more just because of the Git integration that it has inside of it, right? And it's very simple. It shows me like everything that I can add into add into stage and be able to add a commit very easily. And then I go back to the command line when I need to do something a little more complex, right? I don't know if that answers your question, but I feel like for most of the people, those simple commands are all that they need. And then for more advanced things, I don't, I probably fall in those 75% of people. Tim, you probably fall in the 25% or whatever, right? So.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that definitely Git has a lot of sharp edges and a seriously steep learning curve. I think I'm definitely of the camp though where I think Git, and this is a bit of a cop out, I know, but I think Git gets a lot easier to understand. Works under others, that how commits are created and what a merge commit is. Like I think everything sort of starts falling into place. But I agree that that's probably not a design goal for a tool that everyone in the world or every developer in the world is going to have to use at some point. That you have to sort of understand how it works under the hood. The advice that I usually give to developers who are kind of starting out with Git is to read some of the kind of basic documentation. So as you said, the Git.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, you were breaking up there a little bit. There you go.
No, that's okay.
Right there.
I think once you understand
right
it's good. Oh, am I in?
Yeah,
you're good.
Can you hear me? Okay. So we've actually put together like a microsite at Atlassian, which is like agnostic. It doesn't really talk about Bitbucket as a hosting tool, but more just about how you get up and running with a Git repository and get migrated from Subversion or CVS or wherever you're coming from. And it's a pretty good place to start because it sort of explains conceptually how Git hangs together from a user perspective. But I think once you've sort of got your head around that and you're fairly, you're productive in your workflow as a developer, the two big things that I
This just creates more work for me.
Recognizing how much that transforms your Git your Git experience. Just being able to hit tab to complete a branch name, or even these days you can type like a Git command, like git log, and then type in -- and hit tab, and it shows you a list of all of the the possible options, which is just a really nice way to explore kind of the power that Git has to offer.
Or then you accidentally rebase onto master without having anything up to date first, and then you need your own Tim to come and fix it for you. That's just what. So everybody just needs to go out and get their own Tim.
I've got mine. Nobody's taking mine.
We have one as well.
Yeah, my Tim is called Aaron, so you just get your own.
Well, the other thing the thing that can definitely help you understand like when things go pear-shaped, like how to get out of it, is there's a really good ebook by a guy called Scott Chacon called Pro Git, and it's not a huge amount of work. It's like maybe 11 11 or 12 chapters and each chapter you can read in like 30 minutes or whatever. So you can spend an afternoon kind of covering it all. But it does a really good job of covering kind of some of the more advanced workflows and concepts like rebasing and Git hooks and stuff like that. But it also like looks under the covers just enough to give you a bit of an understanding of how Git works from like a computer science perspective, and it's really well written. So like if you haven't read Pro Git, I highly recommend it as like a place to level up.
Or if all else fails, delete the repository off your computer and then clone it again. That is always a valid solution.
Sometimes I give up and do that.
Yeah.
I think the complexities of Git also get more complex when you have more than like one person working in the repo too, right? Like the more people that you're trying to push into one branch, you're going to have problems like Git commits, with merge commits, merge conflicts, and things like that, where you have to try to solve those things. And you're like, the command line for trying to do a merge commit just isn't as intuitive as it should be, right? And then you've got to go through these files and find these, big arrow things with SHA numbers that don't make sense, and you're not quite sure which one, so it gets more and more complex the more people you add to a repo and are trying to contribute at the same time. So if you're just starting out, just try it with yourself on your local computer. Just get the hang of committing, and pushing up to a repo, and you won't have as much problems there, I don't think, as where the problems really come in is when you start working with other people. You're trying to
and they don't. No one really teaches source control, right? I mean, that no one taught me in college. Hey, you know what? Skim. This is gonna rule a good portion of your development time as you try to figure out how in the world to actually push your code somewhere. And that makes it tough, right? So you do have to do quite a bit of learning on your own, and preferably break your own stuff before you try to break someone else's stuff.
I think you gain the experience too by gaining those experiences through work, right? I mean, it's hard to teach something theoretical when you can't really replicate it in a classroom type setting. I mean, I used to do training for Git where it was just basic commands, and it was like an 8-hour day of basic commands, and then we got into a little bit more advanced stuff. But trying to create a situation or a lab that mimics the kinds of problems that people are having, where you need a Tim to come help you solve that, other than my situation that I was talking about earlier, which was just dumb, it's hard to create that environment to replicate.
So I know we're running up against time, but I did want to touch on migration. It's somewhat of a 4-letter word in some respects when it comes to, a lot of things, but source control in particular. There are a lot of older repos or projects, both in the open source community and privately, that are on other source control systems, be it centralized or distributed. I mean, what kinds of migration challenges are out there these days? I mean, I know that there's actually a fairly well-defined SVN to Git sort of approach these days, but are there pitfalls or pratfalls? Should people look to move to Git or some other sort of distributed version control?
I think, yeah, definitely. So there used to be a big caveat. So I'm very, very pro Git, as you may have picked up. But there used to be one major caveat for migrating to Git, particularly from Subversion and other centralized version control systems, where it didn't handle very large files very well. So for a game development shop or another development industry where they've got very large media files checked into their Subversion repositories, or very large binaries, so like if you've got a whole bunch of compiled code or jar files or whatever kicking around in your repo, then Git doesn't handle that, or didn't handle that particularly well, because one of the things about being a distributed version control system is that everyone will have to have a complete copy of that repository's history, which means massive bandwidth problems transferring all of that stuff over the wire. If you have a very with Subversion, it doesn't really matter if your repository is 100 gigabytes or a terabyte in terms of the actual depth, because when you do a checkout, you're only really just getting the very latest copy or the very latest commit and everything that's reachable from there. Whereas Git, you get the whole thing. But there's a project that's actually a joint effort between GitHub, Atlassian, and Microsoft called Git LFS, or Git Large Files, which has been designed to solve exactly that. Where all of your large files are actually kept in a separate data store, and then only like little references to those are stored in your Git repository. And I think that has solved kind of the last really big problem that Git has for teams with large files. So I'm of the opinion these days that basically everyone can and should be using Git.
So you actually brought up, you talking about video. I'm a novice at video game stuff, other than playing them, but you do think about like how like you do think about like how large game downloads are now. So like you get ones that are like a couple gigs, and then you get some that are 50 gigs, like 40, 50 gigs to download the game, and that's the nice packaged together thing that you're downloading. I mean, and most of that is assets, right? A lot of that is your textures and things like that, especially as we get people are putting in like 4K quality textures and above that, and those files just get big. But you think if you do have like a 40 gig game, how big must that source code be?
Yeah, totally. Well, particularly if they're keeping those textures and things in version control. I have a theory actually with games that to sort of cut down on loading times and things. I think these days, because bandwidth is so cheap and transfer speeds are so fast, that I think they're probably shipping multiple resolutions of each texture, like uncompressed, like just because they can, and that means that it's a lot faster to load on your console. Yeah, for version control, like these things have to be tracked somewhere, and I think traditionally, if you wanted to use Git, then you couldn't track those things in your Git repository, which meant that there'd be more complexity because you have to overlay some tool to bring these things into your working copy from wherever you're keeping them, which is probably like a network server sitting somewhere. So I'm hoping that with Git LFS, that's going to make the lives of those developers a lot easier. And actually, I think realistically, most of these the game development shops are probably using that do handle.
That's a screenshot worthy one.
That's the best one.
I'm going to have to go back and watch the recording of this.
By far. How long would that Git clone take?
Yeah, right.
Like if you're thinking like you're talking about like a big game like Killzone or something like that, like if you're just like okay, onboarding a new developer, cool. This URL, hit git clone, then go home.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, in the US, like you're talking about, it's probably like an overnight thing, right? But if you're working anywhere remote, like I remember used to having to try and do like game downloads using Steam in Australia, and like literally you'd queue up like a largish game and then come back 4 days later and you can play it. It's ridiculous. And I think that's probably what developers working remotely have to deal with. And even if you're not remote, even if you're sitting at the other end of like a beautiful fiber channel, it's still too slow to really work properly.
You reminded me. You reminded me of like back in college when I used to when I had to download Netscape 4 for my 2400 baud modem through IE3. Yeah, that was at least a couple of days tying up the phone line, just trying to get that down.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
Well, back in the day, even install times took a long time.
Yeah.
Like even if you bought the physical game. Like before I had internet, it would be that we would have like, all right, cool, come home. Here's a new computer game. Here's Heroes of Might and Magic 3 or whatever. Put it in. I have to go do something else because it's going to take X hours just to get it off the disk onto the hard drive.
I mean, how many of us have also accidentally or had a team member accidentally commit a large video file to the website they were building right into Git. Next time you do a Git clone or you do a Git pull, it's like, okay, why is this taking so long? Who did this? Come on, and you can't go back because there's history there. It's always there. You've got to do. You need a Tim to go and fix it. So.
Absolutely, like we said. So the theme of this episode is get your own Tim.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it is getting friendlier. Like I'm hoping that one day, that like the Git Porcelain, which is the sort of set of commands that you use on a day-to-day basis, like git add and git commit. It is getting better at warning you when you do silly things. Like I'm hoping that at some point you'll be able to set like a pre-commit hook that checks that you're not checking in a binary that's over a megabyte or something like that, or at least says, hey, you sure you want to do this? This is probably going to screw over your teammates. I'd recommend not doing it. Maybe that's something that we as vendors can improve ourselves. Just
it's like there is a little Git robot as you do something, just like slowly raises his hand. It's like, are you sure?
Yeah. I really like that idea.
Well, so you could, if they do that, you could do that with Git hooks. Like you could actually build like a little robot that just like raises his hand if something is over. Like, oh, that's a great idea. I'll do that. Everybody gets a little Git robot.
Or when you set up your Git repo, it's like, okay, who is your Tim? And then when you do a commit, that's going to screw up. We are going to email the Tim if you continue to do this.
I like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure about this idea.
All right, Justin, you have anything else to add?
Oh, we could talk all day, but no, I think we've covered a significant amount of ground on project management and Git today. So yeah. It's been fantastic having you guys on. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, guys.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a good time. I got lots of screenshots. There'll be Tim. There's just the artwork for this episode. Just Tim.
Can you tweet me your best one? I'll make it Maybe not.
All right. Again, so guys, thank you very, very much for coming on. This was a blast. It's always fun to talk about this kind of stuff. All the opinions that are out there are fantastic. So, right before we run away, how can people get in touch with you if you are working on anything open source? Is there anything that that you guys are looking to do, or like Twitter handles, all that kind of stuff? Want to plug anything? Now's your time. Go for it.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Redwolves, REDWOLBES, and pay attention to the jQuery Foundation. We're trying to. Our mission is to try to have an open web, and we want our projects to be very open and very community centric. So keep an eye on what we're doing there. We've got a lot of changes that are coming down the pike, and I'm pretty excited about that. So look at that, and then the last thing for me is take a look at what we're doing at developer.atlassian.com and see if you can integrate your product or website into our products. HipChat and the HipChat Connect is really cool way to integrate into from your application into chat. A lot better than /commands. You can almost have a full application in there.
And you can reach me. So I'm Tim Pedersen at Atlassian. My handle is Cannonboy with a K, so KANNONBOY. In terms of plugging stuff, I've got this little fun side project I've been working on for a while, which is like a little HTML5 platform game that transforms your Git repository history into a platform game level. So you can actually play as this little thing running around on the lines of code in your in your repo. It's my pinned tweet, so if you want to go check it out and tweet me your high score, that'd be fun.
Awesome. That actually sounds really cool. I might have to talk to you about that later. That sounds fun. But yeah. So thank you again. Absolutely great time. So this has been another edition of the Web Platform Podcast. This was episode 77, Project Management and Git Workflows, and we will talk to everybody next week.
Thank you.